Hello and welcome to Season 2 of The Love of Cars presented by Hagerty. I'm Justin Bell, here's Tommy Kendall. And I got to say, TK, when we reflect back on the circumstances that created this show in the first place and its ultimate success, I'm really happy about it.
Well, you know, it definitely exceeded all expectations for a number of reasons. Primarily, we had none.
Yeah, that's true.
It came together so fast, from the idea to Hagerty saying, yeah, let's do it, lining up the guests. We were literally on the air in a matter of weeks and didn't even know who was going to be on the final shows. And it was just super serendipitous. The stars aligned. We clearly were onto something because we got great guests, great material. They all wanted to talk about it, and it covered a lot of ground. And so I know my mom, who is my biggest fan, but also a very fair critic, says, you know, I didn't know a lot of those people. She knew Patrick Dempsey, but she said they were all fascinating and so interesting. So there's a lot of meat on the bone, and so we're going to go for a little bit more of it.
But how do you improve on something that, for him and I, certainly was as close to perfection as we'd ever get? Well, you can't get better guests, per se, because we had some amazing people on the show in Season 1. But really it was about telling more stories and broadening our reach. We also thought what a fun thing it would be to create a theme for each show, to sort of give it a roof under which we could operate. And the theme for this week is when a movie moves the market. And the movie we're talking about, of course, is the groundbreaking Ford versus Ferrari. And certainly every one of our guests, in their own way, had a role to play in bringing that to the big screen. So the guests for today's show, we're very excited to have them on, but we're going to kick it off with Carroll Shelby, who is a board member of Shelby International, and he's also the co-president of the Shelby Foundation. Now, Carroll Shelby is a very stoic, strong, very manly man who doesn't mince his words. He gets to the point. And I think he wanted TK to be in the finance world when he started out. And certainly that was the direction he headed in. But as is always the case with family dynasties, eventually you get sucked in to the family biz. And he sure did. He ended up actually running the family bank. I didn't even know they had one until we did the show. But he also worked alongside his grandfather in various roles, especially when it came to leading up and heading up a lot of the various family business interests, which are varied and different in scale. But also, he made it to the red carpet when they did the premiere of Ford versus Ferrari. So I just can't wait to meet him.
Well, our second guest is not related by blood to Carroll Shelby, but probably spent more time with him than anyone in the final years of his life. Gary Patterson is the president of Shelby American and worked, and still is the president after Carroll's passing, carrying on the legacy, but worked right by the right hand of Carroll and dealt with not only the genius creative side, but also the impulsive side as well. So we're going to hear what it's like to manage those two things and keep that ship moving forward.
Well, when you watched the movie, you saw some incredible car scenes, and you saw his work, but you may not know his name. Robert Nagle was the stunt coordinator for Ford versus Ferrari, and as pros, you and I, TK, we probably the wrong audience for these movies setting out, because we look at it with the professional's eye and we go, that was the wrong line through a corner. They went the wrong way on the track. The revs didn't match the gear shifts. But it's really hard to get that right, and certainly for a broader audience using period-correct cars, no CGI, and Robert brought that action to life. So truly an amazing feat, and I can't wait to find out quite how he did it and some of the stories behind the scenes. So as I said, every one of our guests has something to do with the movie. They have an awful lot to do with the Shelby legacy. Let's find out more. Yeah, we're talking about big family names. It's probably time we bring on our next guest, Tommy.
No question. You know, we're talking about when a car story goes mainstream, and joining us is a man who's part of the royal family, if you will, of American hot rodding, the grandson of Carroll Shelby, Carroll Shelby. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, happy to be here today. Thank you. It's exciting.
Well, we're excited because neither of us have come down from sort of the high moments of watching Ford versus Ferrari, enjoying every moment of the movie, getting to know you. I came to watch the opening of the Shelby documentary, the Netflix movie. It seems we've seen a lot of you in the last year. Is that how it feels to you? Suddenly, Shelby is on everyone's tongues.
It is. I tell you, the Ford versus Ferrari movie was just amazing for what it did for brand recognition. And particularly for the younger generation. Justin, for those that are younger than you and I, for sure, that didn't know the Shelby story, they all know what it is now. And it's amazing how many people that I run across in just day-to-day life that have seen it had no idea that Carroll did all that, that the Shelby team did all that with Ford, and it really has brought that story to a brand new audience.
Well, that's when you know the story has, like you said, caught on, because it's been legendary in the hardcore car circle forever. But once it starts breaking into the mainstream, now talk about the garage. First off, that you're in here, it looks like Christmas come early. What do you have there?
Yeah, this is actually at my house. I was asked to put some cars in the background, so I've got our 2017 Ford GT, awesome vehicle. A lot of fun to drive around. Have not had it on the track yet. I'm a bit tall to get in there with the helmet. I've got to figure that one out. But we've got about 2,000 miles on it. And then up top, I've got my 2015 GT350. That one I have had on the track, and it is just an awesome car.
Well, if you want to
really a lot of fun.
So I was going to say, Aaron, if you want to have hints on how to get a 6-foot+ frame with a helmet into any car, Tommy has made a living out of that.
He's the man. I've watched him do that many a time.
So let's go back a bit, because you didn't just get involved after your grandfather passed away. You were around a lot. You spent a lot of time with him. You rode in the pace car at Indy with him. There's two sides, one as a family man and one as a businessman. What are you, from both points of view, what are your recollections of your granddad?
You know, when I was younger, we spent a lot of time with him at his farm out in East Texas. So a lot of it was, visiting his horses. He had raised cattle out there, and he didn't talk cars at all when we were young, unless you really asked him questions about it. It was all about, that was his family home, and he just liked to be out there and relax. As he joined Chrysler in the 80s and I got to be a teenager, that's when I started to learn a little bit more about his history. And I would quiz him a little bit more. And anytime events came up, like the Indy 500, I'm like, hey, I want to go. Can I go? And he always said yes, but he usually never offered. And I always asked him later on in life why that was, because he did all kinds of great things. He's like, well, I just didn't know if you guys were that interested in it or not. And quite frankly, he didn't want to be a minder either. So he didn't want to have to keep up with kids running around all the time. But I loved it, as did my brothers. My father raced cars starting when I was 8. He raced Formula Fords and Formula Atlantics through the 80s and early 90s. So I grew up around that, and I've always been passionate about it.
Now, it's interesting that you said he didn't talk cars. He was out on the farm there. Any sort of grandfatherly type things? I mean, he was a guy that was involved in so many things, so creative, so many life stories, had a lot of wisdom, I'm sure. Did he impart some of that stuff to you out on the farm, fixing a fence or what have you?
Most definitely. No, we talked a lot about that type of stuff. And Carroll, in the movie, played it out a little bit. He liked to skirt the rules as much as he could. He played in the gray areas. He said, you don't really want to go over the bounds, but stay in the gray area and push the envelope as hard as you can. That way you're going to succeed. If you don't do that, you're just going to be sitting at a desk your whole life, not accomplishing anything. So we definitely watched that. Now, I will tell you also, I worked with him in the late 90s for about a year. I managed some of his properties and some of his business. I loved him as a grandfather a whole lot more than I loved him as a boss. So after a year, that was plenty.
Well, let's dig into that a little bit, because obviously a lot of stuff gets glorified. What were some of his difficult aspects? What was hard about dealing with him?
He's an idea guy, and he had ideas every day. But if you think about trying to run a business and managing a group, when he was up in his 70s and 80s, that was not his desire. He just wanted to tell people what to do and go do it. Well, I like to question things. He always, just go get this done. I'm like, well, why are we doing it this way? Why don't you do it that way? And he'd start yelling and screaming and just do it however you want to do it. I don't want to get involved in all that. And it was, again, skirting the rules. I was like, there's some of these rules we got to follow. Some of them I don't mind going in the gray area a little bit. So it was interesting. I learned a lot working with him for sure. And I think any of the guys that worked on the team back in the 60s, or even any of the Shelby team today that worked with him, would tell you the same thing. He came in with grand ideas. He wasn't so concerned on how to get there. He just wanted to get to the end result.
So when you watched the movie, obviously I know you saw it evolve to the end point, but as you sat in the movie theater watching the finished product, and fans, there's people in the audience around you who might not necessarily have known who you were sitting there. What was the best bit in the movie to you that probably reflected the real Carroll Shelby the best? What was there a moment that you went, actually, that was spot on? That's just how Granddad would have done it.
There's a couple of those moments in there. I'll tell you one of them that I get a kick out of is when he takes over flying the plane into the Mustang introduction. A lot of people don't know that he was a pilot in World War II, and he loved flying probably more than cars. I could totally see him taking that plane over and trying to land it and then hopping out and making a big show out of it. He, as much as he was down home and loved to be kind of humble about things, when it came to something like that, he really liked to show everybody what he was worth.
Well, and there's a lot to be said for making an impact, whether it's guys like a Steve Jobs, these visionary people, Elon Musk. Sometimes that sets the whole relationship, is making a splash. Was that something he just kind of turned on and off, like you said, or I mean, how did he get his showman nature?
I think the secret is yes. I saw a lot of behind the scenes, and I had a lot of times where I was with him in the office or at his house, and he was yelling and screaming at somebody on the phone, and then he'd give me a wink out of the corner of his eye, and it was all an act. He knew what he was doing. He just liked to stir the pot.
Oh, well, I mean, and look what it created. He was such an instigator. It really did create a new market, a new world. But what do you think he would have thought if he was sitting in the audience?
I think he would have been entertained with the story. I think as some of the more diehard guys were, they would have picked it apart a little bit. I think he would have said, well, it didn't really happen this way. It really they should have done this. But in general, I thought it was a great way to tell a story. It was entertaining. It got out to a really wide audience, and the female side of the audience, I was surprised at. It's amazing how many women have said they really enjoyed watching it, dreading going in thinking it was just a car film, not realizing it was more of a person story.
I mean, that's really the name of this segment, Aaron, is this show is, it's when a car movie goes mainstream, because that has been spectacularly unsuccessful for the main part for the last 50 years. Not many people can do it with a real motorsports-related story, unless it's totally fictional.
He hit the key. Like women, I don't want to put them all in the same category, but generally speaking, they're more casual fans and more interested in the story and the drama and so forth. Now, speaking of women, he had a lot of female storylines in his life as well. I don't know where I'm going with that.
No, I like where you're going. I'm just more interested in where Aaron's picking it up. So you get what he's dropping. How are you going to pick that up?
So, Justin, you saw the documentary.
Oh, yeah.
Carroll was married a lot in his life.
A lot.
The actual number is in dispute, though, right?
It is. 7 to 9 is, we think, the official number for marriage. That doesn't include everybody else that may have come through the picture over time.
It's like earnings estimates. They give a range sort of thing.
Yes. That's it. So, and some the family got along with, and some we didn't get along with. But that was his life. And that was, we all just knew that was who he was. And I did ask him a couple of times why he felt he had to be married. Why couldn't you just date somebody for a while? And he just, something deep inside him said, well, if I think I love somebody, I need to marry him.
I mean, he is my hero now more than he was before.
Now, I got to spend a long flight, and I didn't say a word until we were landing because I didn't want to bother him. And it turns out he knew who I was. I didn't know he would, and we became friends from that point forward. But the one thing, whenever I was around him, always struck me, even towards the end of his life, he had a childlike curiosity. So even though he was old, he was still really in touch with things like drifting that a lot of old-timers had no interest in. So he wasn't just an idea guy. He was also current. Was he? Where did that come from? Was he just childlike enthusiasm?
I think it was curiosity more than anything else. It was, and that's what kept him going. I mean, had his body physically not given out by the time he was 89, he would still be here doing that. His mind was going nonstop on what's the next big thing, what's the next entertaining thing, what's the next technology that's coming out. He had, some people have heard me say this, but he had his heart transplant, kidney transplant, a lot of medical issues. And he was as smart as his doctors. He read medical journals voraciously and just continually wanted to know what the latest technology was in medicine, what the guys were doing with drifting. And some of the videos that Ford has of him in the last couple of years of development on the GT500s are amazing, because he's really getting insightful on exactly what they're working on, both from a technology perspective and a performance perspective.
He had to have been one of the longest surviving heart. How long did he live with the transplanted heart? It was like 25 plus years.
That's correct, and he was. And when he got his heart in 1990, They said this will give you 3 to 5 years maybe.
Wow.
And they really thought his kidneys would give out, and they did. And then he wound up getting a kidney transplant, and that extended a little bit more. And they said that would be 3 more years, and that wound up being 15 more years.
Wow.
Thank God.
Thank goodness. Yeah. Imagine our world without the second half of the Shelby era, if you like, which is the car up on the top there, and obviously a lot of
Viper was
the
later.
Viper.
Yep.
I mean, the Viper, without that, I hadn't really. That was the most intense part, successful part of my racing career, was racing the Vipers. So, and that's when I first met him, because they'd bring him along to some of those events, and I got to see him there. But I was just wondering, what was your interaction with the actors like? Did they want to sit down with you, and did Matt Damon want to talk to you about what he was like? Did they?
No, we really didn't. And it was funny. We offered to help, and they're like, no, the studio, I don't know Hollywood well, but I assume they just saw more money going out the door if they wanted to bring more consultants in. So I didn't bother with that. But we wound up meeting the PR folks as they got to know us and know that Shelby was actually a real company and still going and had a pretty big following. So really toward the end of filming and when they were doing the editing, they started calling us to ask some questions and wanted to get Team Shelby Enthusiast Club involved, and myself and my brothers involved in the promotion of the film. So when we met Matt for the first time, I asked him, I said, so how did you research this? I don't know if you talked to anybody. He said, no, your grandfather's got hundreds and hundreds of hours on YouTube. He's like, I just went out and watched the interviews of him, and you could just pick up his nuances and kind of pick up when he was talking about certain characters that were in the movie, he tried to kind of glean that from YouTube interviews. So it was an interesting aspect, which I hadn't thought about, but it's true. If you go search Carroll out on YouTube, there's a lot of hours of him out there.
Yeah, not a shy talker, so I'm sure.
No.
And caught the end of the YouTube generation. That's pretty, I mean, the beginning of it, but the end of his world. So Shelby has, I mean, it was on the map, as Tommy said, for the enthusiast world to the racing world. It's now known by so many more people. For us as race drivers, it actually allowed, my dad said, God, you know, I've been racing. I did Le Mans 32 times, won it 5 times, and finally people know what I do in the middle of France in the summer. It really did open it up. How is that reflected onto the Shelby brand, and how is that help business and that kind of thing?
I think that always goes back to there's an early 60s Ford video clip where Carroll walks out of the factory and says, I'm Carroll Shelby and performance is my business. Today, that line lives true in Shelby American. And that's what we do when we're working on new product today. We try and look at what would the Shelby DNA be here and what would be working on that to make it Carroll's car. And you look at what Ford does, and we talk to the Ford engineers pretty frequently. You look at the new GT500 and this GT350 behind me, they did the same thing. A lot of these guys worked with Carroll in the previous generations of cars, and they know the aspects of performance that he wanted. And so that racing heritage, I think, gives you some credence out there. It says, we were successful. We knew what we were doing, and that DNA carries forward today. You know, Gary Patterson, who's our president, has been with us close to 25 years now. So he worked a lot with Carroll in development of the Series 1 and a lot of the newer Mustang product as well. And so Gary knows what Carroll was after and what that DNA is, and we can use that to help promote the brand today.
Now, in reading through your bio, you have a background in banking. Is there a Shelby family interest in banking, timber, some other areas? Are those from Carroll's part of the family, or is there another part of Shelby that has gotten you into all that stuff?
No, that was actually my grandmother, Carroll's first wife. I tell people, and I've been at the bank about 16 years now, we've since sold, but I've stayed on board. Had Carroll been involved in the bank, we would have failed a long time ago.
He and banking regulators are not a great fit, probably.
No, definitely not. So the timber's a little bit of joint. You know, he grew up in East Texas and had a couple farms out there. Many years ago, my grandmother traded some property and wound up getting some timberland out there. And so I started managing the family timber property, maybe 20 years or so ago. And we've increased the holdings, and it's just a good long-term business. But my father and my grandmother were really the more entrepreneurial side when it came to kind of core business aspects. We're in oil and gas as well. But the banking was key. Dad took that over back in the late 80s, and we spent a lot of time there until we sold in 2015.
Wow, fascinating.
It is fascinating to have all that. When we were doing our research, we're like, oh, there's a lot more to this than meets the eye. Before we let you go, Aaron, the show is called Love of Cars because we've worked out that whether it's Michelin star chefs, musicians, we in our environment, we see this common passion, this shared enthusiasm for cars that really does bond people. And there was always a first moment. What was your first moment? What was your earliest recollection of being involved, surrounded, growing up in the car industry when you went, this is what I want to be, this car is the one that kicked it off for me?
I think when I was young, I was probably 8 or 9 years old. My uncle had a 289 Cobra, and Dad said, hey, let's go for a ride in this real quick. It was dark out. We had gotten into town late, but he wanted to go drive it. So I got in the passenger seat. He turned that thing on, and I think that was what sparked my love. Shortly after that, he started racing, and I love going to the races. I'll go to any race I can anytime. I've done that my whole life. Like I said, Dad started when I was 8 years old, but that first ride in a 289 Cobra really lit the fire. And then when Carroll joined Chrysler, when I was 9, 10 years old and into the 80s, I really started reading up on it, and it's like, there's a lot of history here, and there's really some great people involved. And we talk about that a lot today. The cars and the technology are fantastic and what you can do with them, but it's always about the people. You look at, you go to Goodwood or Monterey, or we do our Team Shelby events around the country, and it's always just a family getting together, and it's great to catch up with people. And yes, you have a common bond in the vehicles that are there, but it's about joining with people that have like interests, and you learn about their families and what their passions are. And to me, that's really what I enjoy the most today is representing the Shelby brand and bridging that gap between the generations that are out there with the enthusiasm of folks of Team Shelby or really anybody. I mean, I've met some great people, you two included. I mean, it's just so much fun to be involved in this world.
Before we let you go, the bike here in the background hasn't been spoken of. Transportation is changing. What's up with the Shelby bicycle?
We actually partnered with a group out of Santa Clara, California last year called Vintage Electric Bike, and they've been around for about 8 or 10 years. So they did a Shelby branded vintage electric bike. It's got a booster switch on it. You can go up to 45 miles an hour on it. Their other ones do not go that fast. So I just took delivery of mine a couple of weeks ago, so I've been out riding around it and testing it out. But it's 45 on a bike like this pretty quick.
That's pretty quick. Well, like you, we miss being at events. We miss crossing paths with you and all the fans and our entire community of car people. I'm sure we'll be back doing it again soon, but in the meantime, this was as close as we could get. So thank you very much. And now we're actually going to talk to Gary. He's coming on to talk to us all about the business side of things. So thank you so much, Aaron, for being a part of the show.
Fantastic. You're welcome. I really appreciate you having me on.
Thanks, Aaron.
Take care.
Such a unique and fascinating perspective, someone who worked alongside him, but obviously a grandson, looked up to him, intimidating and inspiring at the same time. I love the line where he said, I loved him a whole lot more as a grandfather than I did as a boss, though.
I mean, just imagine the stories, the being there as part of the family legacy. But being a family member is one thing, and I just mentioned it. Imagine being the guy that has your hands on the steering wheel and the gear shift and your foot on the clutch and the gas for the Shelby Corporation now. So let's check in with Gary and see, well, maybe find something, what happens behind the scenes.
For the next segment of The Love of Cars, when a car story goes mainstream, we have the president of Shelby American, and a man that arguably probably spent more time with the man himself, Gary Patterson. Welcome to The Love of Cars.
Hey, it's always good to be here,
So how have you been getting on through all this? You've got a business to run in the middle of everything.
Well, if it was easy, anybody could do it. But we've got a great team of people, and that's really what it's all about. You've got to get your team engaged, and Carroll was always good at, surrounding himself with the right people. And I think we've got a great team here. And so we've been hard on the gas, not the brake. And we've had a few challenges here and there as they keep throwing us curveballs, but we keep hitting them. So I think we're doing just fine.
That's really, you immediately kicked off with the question I was going to ask you. How would Carroll feel about the way the company's handling all this? Would he I'm sure he would have been a wide open guy, wouldn't he?
Yeah, we're foot flat on the floor. I mean, we're looking for the next thing. performance is our business, and we're certainly not going to let a virus stop us. So, we just got to play with the rules and make sure everybody's safe. But, the good thing is, we've got Cobras, we've got Mustangs, we've got 4 different lines of trucks. We got more stuff on the way. So, we're busy. We're busy.
Well, and obviously this is a different challenge than we've seen, but you hit the nail on the head. If it was easy, everybody would be doing it. And that always applies. It's probably applied to every day you've been on the job there. You joined Shelby American in 1996, so you've been there through all the is that the start of the continuation cars? Tell us everything you've been through at the company.
Well, we don't have that kind of time, but that being said, yeah, I mean, really it was the start of the continuation cars in 1996. I was involved behind the scenes a little bit in 95, but yeah, 96 officially. Worked with Carroll for the next 16 years, and through that 16 years, we saw not only the beginnings of the rebirth of the Cobra, if you will, but we built a car from scratch, the Shelby Series 1. Really a cool car. Lots of challenges with that one too. If you've ever built one from scratch, had to go through all the regulations and testing and trials and tribulations of kind of a start up your own company in that regard. Of course, I was at a different level at that point, but still very involved in the test and development driving and behind the scenes, and small company, big brand. It was cool. And, then we got back into the Mustang business with the Shelby Super Snakes in 2007. Before that, the rental car company in 2006 with the Hertz cars really kind of kicked us off again. But the Series 1 it's really the only car we did from scratch. And I see a picture of the black one up there. That was old X4. I think that just sold at an auction, as a matter of fact. But I used to run around the racetrack with that one and, test its performance attributes as well as a few other things. And boy, I'll tell you what, that was a lot of fun. But Carroll was always on to the next thing. And he was a guy that lived his life, as I put it, in kind of my terms, really foot flat to the floor, looking out the windshield, occasionally glancing into the rearview mirror and kind of having a nice smile and looking at all the things that we accomplished. Little things like world championships as a driver, as a manufacturer, as a team leader. But other than that, he was always focused on what was next. And as we, kind of go through the history and time, we had 65 Shelby Mustangs. We had, the 66s. The 67 was the first of the big block cars. That morphed into, we had a stint with the Dodge program and so forth. And Carroll was very instrumental in the Viper and always looking at the next things. And then we, as we got through the continuation cars, the Series 1, the newer Mustangs, really back with Ford, which is kind of where we belong, we got into performance trucks. And holy cow, that's really about 80% of what we do now.
Unbelievable.
So it's trucks.
So you just mentioned the brand. You mentioned the brand a lot, but suddenly they go and make this movie that is a global success, a mainstream success. Even though you were doing well before, I'm sure that just ignited an after boost, didn't it? Because
it sure did. It sure did. It turned the boost up. We always like it when the boost comes up, so that's great. But yeah, what it did was it really introduced ourselves and our brand into a whole new generation of people that might have not have known the story before. And if you look at the movie, it's a true story. If you could pick it apart, you could say, well, that wasn't true, or that wasn't true. But if you look at the main storyline, if you look at the personalities behind it, if you look at that time period and what that movie represented, it was like, how cool is that? 2 thumbs up, And people saw that and they appreciated that. And we saw people coming to our museum and heritage center in droves. The retail store business was up tremendously. We saw a big spike in some of the car and truck sales and enthusiasm for our brand. What we found since then is, obviously we had to close the store for a while, but behind the scenes, people are still buying these cars and trucks. They're going to the dealerships and they like what they see, and they're expensive, but you know what? It's worth it. I mean, if you look at the the last Mecum auction, the GT350 prototype car, the R model, just sold for $3.85 million with these. So, yeah, I think the brand's on fire. The movie certainly kicked it in the pants and helped us get going. But, yeah, hopefully that answers your question on, on movie and stuff. But, you know, I thought the movie was really cool and entertaining.
Yeah. Well, yeah, expensive. You said the cars are expensive, but it's relative when you think about that $3.85 million. Now that you have to, and there is the car that just sold at Mecum up on screen. Now that you obviously have had to navigate without Carroll around, how do you help navigate? Do you tap into, you know, what would Carroll think? How do you go forward with new products? And I'm sure you have stuff on the drawing board right now. I'm not sure we can share with us about that. But how do you keep it true to what he would like?
Well, you know, Carroll was always about, you know, whatever was next. And he wasn't afraid of new technology. He tried stuff. Some of it failed. You know, but the cool thing is I was able to work with Carroll for 16 years. We have a couple members of our senior staff that also worked for Carroll for a long period of time as well. So we got to know Carroll and what he liked, what he didn't like, what he thought, how his thought process was. But more than anything, the legacy continues because of people like you guys. It's the love of cars. It's all the people that view this show, people that have our cars, that just, you know, that's how the legacy continues. And if we're smart, we listen. Got 2 ears, 1 mouth. If we listen to the people, what do you want? What's exciting to you? What would you like to see in the next Shelby? And then we incorporate those kind of things and ideas in the product that we do next. And then we go to the track and we test it. And some of those great ideas, they don't work. And we break stuff. And when we break stuff, we turn around and we fix it. And it's fun. Sometimes it's expensive, but it's fun. And, you know, but the cool thing is we got car people running a car company, and that's pretty neat.
Yeah. Well, we actually are just launching a new series called Talk Drive, which our other show's called The Talk Show, where Tommy and I are going to come and drive really cool stuff. So we will be calling, Gary, because we'll be heading out to Vegas and we have a tire contract, so don't worry. We'll deal with the tire part. Hey, listen, good luck with everything. Thank you so much for joining us. It's really great to hear an insight. And you did well at 16 years because Aaron said he managed a year before he realized it was better having Carroll as a grandfather than a boss.
Oh, yeah. Well, you know, I did 16 with Carroll, but, you know, it was great because he always knew what was on his mind. He was not shy. So that was really cool. And sometimes he'd poke you and test you. And, you know, but that's also what made it a lot of the fun, especially when I got to do a lot of the test and development driving. And, of course, he had no shortage of critiquing a guy that drove cars for a living.
Wow.
Well, thank you very much, Gary. Take care. Good luck, and we will see you very soon.
Thanks for having me on the show. We'll look forward to having you out to Vegas. Let's go drive some of them cars.
Let's do it. That sounds like a plan. After hearing from Gary, it's safe to say that the legacy and the name is in good hands, and there's some exciting stuff coming down the road. I want to ask him some of the questions about, you know, does he still hear from the ex-wives, lawyers that want a piece of the action, stuff like that? Just such a fascinating story, and you just can't get enough of him.
He definitely knows where the bodies are buried. Hopefully not where the wives are buried, but where the bodies are buried. Wow, how cool. Anyway, the stories he could tell over a cocktail or two. So if you're a car enthusiast or just basically a car collector, you cannot have missed the fact that Hagerty have been making huge inroads into educating, informing, entertaining us in a variety of ways, and they've certainly come up tops with this latest show. I don't actually know if there is another daily automotive show, Tommy, but the Daily Driver news show is Mondays to Thursdays, hosted by Tiffany Stone.
Yeah, and I think of it, it's a great idea. You know, if you are the car guy or girl in your neighborhood that everyone comes to for what the newest stuff, you need to know what the newest stuff is. So it's almost like getting the presidential daily briefing. All you have to do is just watch the Daily Driver news show.
Yeah. So, I mean, isn't it time now that we should get back to the movie? Because I think there's a lot to talk about.
100%. And, you know, if you're going to be an expert on all things car, you need to know how this movie was made. And our next guest tells us how he kept it so real.
Well, you know, when you're watching a movie and you see these incredible stunts going on, and you think to yourself, in real life, someone actually did that. Well, yes, on Ford versus Ferrari, the stunt coordinator was Robert Nagle, who is joining us now because he is the guy that really does it when the actors can't. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys. It's a pleasure.
Well, we've looked at a lot of videos of yours from behind the scenes over the last 24 hours since we knew you were coming on the show, and obviously watched the movie intently. And as real race drivers, something crossed my mind, and I thought, I bet in the back of your mind all the way through was, this has to be as authentic as it can be, because I'm dealing with the legacy of one of the world's biggest races, one of the biggest battles in one of those races, and some of the biggest names. Was that always omnipresent in your mind, that you had to get it real?
That was the basis and groundwork, if you will, for the whole format of how I laid out all the races. I actually, wrote a story for each race because they all have a different feel to them, but absolutely had to be as authentic as possible. I mean, this is going to be criticized by real race car drivers. And by the way, most of my driving team were all pro drivers, a handful of whom actually had raced at Le Mans. And if you look at the credits, I actually hired Alex Fernie to portray his father, and Jeff Bucknam, who his father drove the gold GT40 that finished third. So there's a lot of little legacy details, but absolutely having the authenticity of racing was paramount.
Now, I think a lot of people go into every racing movie with that idea, and then somehow Hollywood is Hollywood, and you get a director or whatever that says, yeah, no, we're going to do it this way. How did you fight against that? Was it having guys like Gurney there with you? How did you fight against, or did you not have to deal with that for some miraculous reason?
I was very fortunate in that James Mangold, who's absolutely amazing to work with, gave myself as a stunt coordinator and Darren Prescott, who was the second unit director, just let us do our thing. He's not a car guy, and I think that sort of helped us. So I got to set up the racing sequences with his blessing, obviously, and he loved it. And I think that kind of helped move things along. I didn't have to battle that. So I was very, very fortunate.
Yeah. Well, you said also in nearly every interview I saw you do about the actors was how good Christian Bale was behind the wheel, how he really got it. And we actually had Patrick Dempsey on our last show of season 1, and he's a great friend of ours, and we've been around his racing since he started. And, he's always wondering how he measures up to the other superstar actors. I mean, Steve McQueen was the guy. Paul Newman was the other real guy. If Christian had a bit more time behind a wheel, where do you think he could get to? Is he really does have the chops?
He absolutely has the aptitude and mindset. He did an amazing job. And it shows on screen so that when we've got him in a rig where he's not driving, he knows what to be doing at any given time and every moment. That completely sells it. But that being said, the days I spent training with him, he's very measured in pushing himself, but he's always asking more of himself and pushing himself, but in small and measured increments, not these big steps to go beyond what he's capable of. But he's constantly asking more of himself, and he did an amazing job.
Wow. Now, you've won Academy Awards for your work and so forth. Now, it's similar to racing where they think, someone that doesn't know thinks stuntmen are all crazy. They think race car drivers are all crazy. The good ones aren't. The good ones are, as you said, kind of very methodical and so forth. Now, how do you can't redo things a zillion times. Were there any, huge stunts or scenes that you had to get right on once? Talk us through a little bit about some of the things you deal with, or maybe an example on this show, a particular stunt, because it's all done one little bit at a time.
It is, and we sit down as a team and map everything out, and everybody's given an assignment to be at a given spot at a given moment, and we'll walk through it. And this may sound silly, but oftentimes we'll set up a little overview with Matchbox cars. I have a whole bag of them, and we'll set them up, and everybody knows which car is theirs, and we'll move them through, step by step what it needs to look like, and then we'll go out and we'll do a rehearsal, maybe at a little bit lower speed. And once everybody feels comfortable, we'll do it. And a lot of times we get it done in 1 or 2 takes.
Yeah, well, especially with the value of the gear that you are using, not just from a camera point of view, but the cars. But something just came to mind. If I look at a lot of the movies you've done over the last 10 years, they're using state-of-the-art technology in terms of the cars. You're using the latest cars, and I know ABS is a pain in the arse for stunt driving, but you've got safety cells, you've got crash zones, you've got all the best brakes, you've got great weight distribution, electronics and things. Not so on the cars you were dealing with for this movie. Did that bring a sort of an unintended consequence to things?
No, and you actually bring up a good point. Oftentimes we disconnect a lot of those safety features. Yeah. The manufacturers spend millions of dollars designing all these safety features in the cars, and we do everything we can to disable them. But that being said, like I said, the majority of my drivers were ex-race car drivers, and they don't expect to have a vehicle with ABS or stability control and all that. But moreover, these cars were beasts. I mean, they weighed about 2,200 pounds and were about just over 500 horsepower. So they were very serious, very fast, and they were a handful.
Now, going through the list, obviously you mentioned Alex Gurney, Jeff Bucktum. You also had Paul Dallenbach, Tony Hunt, 10-time USAC champion. Derek Hill was on that. How many days do you guys spend together, and any funny stories about some shenanigans that broke out with all those guys?
We could do probably a whole week's episode of that. You'd probably have to censor out a majority of it. But they were good. They came to work very professional. But obviously, the nature of the beast, guys like this, when there's downtime, a little bit. You have to.
Yeah. Of those guys, is there one that stands out without getting him in trouble? Is there some? I know I've been around Alex. He's got a wicked sense of humor.
Who are you gunning for?
Well,
who are you gunning for?
I mean, in terms of commentary, Alex is really, really vicious with some of the one-liners.
Yeah, he's got some. Yeah, he's very witty. There's another guy, Kelly Collins.
No, well, I'm surprised the movie even got made. That's the end of this interview. No, he was my teammate at Corvette. Destroyed my career. No, I mean, ever since.
I don't say a word, right?
Actually, we've got a picture of some of these guys. I thought that was Kelly in the photo.
Kelly
give him
is
a second
scream.
to pull it up here. Okay, here's one of the ones. I think Alex is right in the back behind you, and then Jeff Bucktum is next to him. It's not too close, but
I love the race suits.
Yeah, the race suits. Everything is just really.
The costume department nailed it. They did a fantastic job, and they reproduced these suits for us in Nomex for safety, while retaining the authenticity. So they did a great job.
Wow. So Tommy has a second part to this question. Mine is the first part to this question, which is, up to this point, what was your favorite car movie, racing movie? Two different things, I guess, car or racing.
I mean, my go-to favorite car movie has always been Ronin. As far as a racing movie, I mean, we got to go back to Grand Prix and Le Mans.
Yeah.
So, and my part is, not so much racing, but car chase. Maybe Ronan's the answer. One that stands out for me, against all odds. I used to recreate that route going to UCLA every day on Sunset Boulevard there and that was a legendary stuntman that was not a racer. I think it was Kerry Lofton was the. But what's your favorite car chase scene?
I mean, I could toot my own horn and say Baby Driver.
Yeah.
But to be fair, Ronin, the chase scenes in Ronin, I thought were spectacular.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there's something else that I really did appreciate about your viewpoint on this was we live in a world where a lot of the movies have gone so into the CGI frame that anything's possible. You can barrel roll your Mustang through the side of a helicopter at 1,000 feet, which of course in real life is really hard to do probably and only do it once. But this was all real stuff. We could feel it as drivers, which I think is a big compliment to you and your team, as race drivers. But that is almost refreshing because you have to live in our three-dimensional world, don't you? And it has to be in the analog space. You're free of if you like, the effects department. Yeah,
and it was a huge conversation James Mangold and I had in the beginning. And we definitely saw eye to eye on that. And, you know, there's a place for CGI that works very well combined with the practical stunts. But it's always been my belief when your actual subject matter becomes CGI, your eye knows the difference.
Yeah.
You can't point to it and say, that's what's wrong. You just know inertly that there's something not right about it. And to me, it takes me out of the story. So if you keep the subject matter real and you can kind of play with the peripheral a little bit, it works. And that's how we've done it. And I'm a big advocate of that and working together with that.
Obviously, you live it. You said it better. I couldn't put my finger on it, but you can literally do anything with CGI. But if it breaks from reality, it takes you out of the stories. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And it's no different than sort of racing. What makes you connect to this is, like, when I go to a race, there's a human being in that car, and you can't imagine being in that spot. So well said there. Question for you. You're a little bit of the tail of the dog. You're a stunt coordinator until you become Michael Bay yourself. But what is the movie you want to make? If you know, who knows who's watching the show, or a chase scene or an aspect. What's the movie that you would love to see made? Whether it's a racing one or a car chase one in Wildest Dreams.
Well, we have Baby Driver 2 in the works, and I'm eager to get going on that. Michael Mann has a race movie potentially that kind of revolves around The Last Meal Amelia, which has some really great stuff in it, really great racing stuff. And I'd love to be part of that, to recreate that. I think it'd be a lot of fun.
Wow, so good. I've got to tell you that, so my dad, he won Le Mans 5 times. He goes to the European premiere and he's there with Damon and Bale, and he's introduced to them, and it was funny because they had a moment of sort of reverse hero worship just for a second, because they'd obviously knew who's all the big stars at Le Mans, but meanwhile my dad's going, that's the guy from Bourne Identity, so he was blown away. But at the end of the movie, Dad's only comment to me, which again is I think a compliment to the storytellers and the authenticity of things, he said, Enzo never went to a race, Justin. He said, I raced for Enzo in Ferrari at Le Mans in 1969. Enzo never actually went to a Formula One or Le Mans. He said, but it made good for the story.
And that's part of the storytelling. It doesn't work if he's not there and having that interaction with.
Yeah, but it worked. It was as Dad said, if that's my only criticism, he said that was, and it wasn't even a criticism, it was a comment. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
Now, one of the big things about this movie, and kind of the theme of this episode, is when a car story goes mainstream. Shelby's well known within, and even that battle is well known within the enthusiast world, the racing world. When did you know that this movie was breaking through into mainstream and it was being, people were really enjoying this, regardless of who they were?
When I started getting feedback from friends, when they would take, a lot of my guy friends would, take their wives or girlfriends to see the film, and they're taking and dragging, going, I don't want to see a car movie, Bob. And then at the end, they come back, oh, wow, that was a great film. That said a lot. And I think that was a recurring theme, if you will, that I heard from friends and family and other people, doing interviews.
Yeah, it was the same from our point of view too. Something that just came to mind was you've done thousands of stunt scenes, coordinated racing and crashing scenes and all those things. I imagine that not many of them involve recreating a real moment when someone died, who was a real person had died. When you had to redo the Ken Miles accident, we knew it was coming. I mean, I was watching it. I know the story. I've read books. Was there a sense of, you did it such justice. It was subtle. I think it was beautifully done, as best as it could be in that circumstance. Was that a special moment, getting that right in his memory?
Yeah, it was, and it was something we didn't want to oversell. It was just something we wanted, because to this day we still don't know what happened. And so the back and forth I had with James Nagle to help portray that was the conversation kind of led down this path of, well, if something's about to go on with the car, he's going to feel it. And if you go back and look, there's a moment he kind of looks around the interior of the car, and then we cut to the exterior and you see the car out of control, and we never see the crash. And that's all kind of left to the audience to kind of come up with their own version, if you will. But we know it was a horrific crash. And I think it worked well, and I love hearing this from you guys that it worked well.
Yeah.
Well, and for added poignancy, I don't know why I didn't mention it, but one of your drivers was Ken's son, Peter, as well. Probably wasn't, I mean, like you said, you didn't show the crash. So spending time with him, even though a lot of time has passed since he was killed, I guess 50 years or so, it had to have taken him back to some of that. Did you get any of that coming through, him revisiting some of those memories?
I wasn't able to talk to him that much, so I look forward to speaking to him.
Yeah. Okay. Well, listen, Rob, it's been so cool. It's like inside the magician's lab here. You know, if you ever need two old white guys, we capture that market. So, I mean, there's nothing that we can't talk fast. But just so cool to have you on the show. Look forward to seeing Baby Driver 2. That's what we want to see.
Yeah, agreed.
So brilliant.
It'll be a lot of fun.
Thanks for joining us, and good luck. You made an epic that we'll be talking about for the rest of our lives.
I greatly appreciate that, guys, and thanks for having me on. It's been fantastic.
Thank you. Good stuff.
Well, it's safe to say that one is going to be around for a while. You've got the star power, but unlike Le Mans, arguably, which didn't have a great story, great subject matter, and unbelievable visuals as well. So I think that one's an icon.
I don't know about you. I've watched it more than once now, actually 3 times. Plane, home twice, and it just keeps getting better and better. And you see more details, and you understand the nuances. I think every great movie is worth watching 2 or 3 times. Well, big thank you to Aaron, Gary, and Robert for making the first episode of season 2 of Love of Cars so absolutely cool, and it's really set the tone for the rest of things to come. And if you like what you see here, please go to Hagerty.com/media/newsletter and sign up for their newsletter, and you can be kept in touch every week on the coolest things in the automotive world. Well, it's goodbye from me, and it's goodbye from him too. We'll see you next week.
When the road calls, we answer with our guaranteed value, unparalleled service and expertise, and savings of $264 on average. Hagerty has you covered no matter what's around the bend. Get a quote today at Hagerty.com.